Two shadowy figures moved silently through the endless whiteness, an old man and his wife leaning on each other as the fierce wind howled along the mountain road. Their coats hung thin and worn their hope even thinner. Out here, no one was meant to be seen. Miles away, a Navy SEAL pushed through the same relentless storm. A man chasing memories, not places, with only his loyal German shepherd by his side. He believed he'd left the life of saving behind, until piercing headlights sliced through the snow, revealing two fragile souls too exhausted to go on. What followed would prove that even amid the harshest winter storms, compassion still finds its way to those lost and abandoned. But before we dive deeper, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country name down below. Snow drifted gently through Blue Ridge's valleys. North Carolina, like delicate white dust shaken straight from the heavens. The sky hung heavy and gray, pressing down on the mountains until their peaks vanished behind a curtain of swirling snow. Roads lay empty, frozen ribbons coiling through a landscape drained of all color. Along one of these roads crawled an old Ford pickup, its engine humming like a weary heart, headlights flickering against the blinding white. Inside, Ethan Cole clenched the wheel with gloved hands. Though he was 38, the war had etched deeper lines into his face than time ever could. His features were sharp, tight with years of discipline and self-control. A rugged, uneven beard shadowed his jaw, ash-dark in hue. Strands of gray cut through his black hair, slick from melted snow. His posture was rigid, soldier-like, but his eyes, cold steel gray and distant, told the story of a man who had witnessed too much and learned that mercy is often a stranger in this world. The truck's heater coughed faintly. The cab smelled of cold metal and aged leather. On the passenger side, Rex, his 4-year-old German shepherd, sat alert. His thick black and tan coat shimmered faintly under the dashboard's glow. A thin scar traced along his side, a silent testament to their years together as a Navy SEAL team in the Middle East. The dog's amber eyes tracked every flicker beyond the windshield. Disciplined, fiercely loyal, and unwaveringly calm, Rex was the only living anchor keeping Ethan tethered to the present moment. Ethan wasn't heading anywhere in particular. Since leaving the Navy, he'd learned to keep moving just to hold on to his sanity. When he stopped, the memories caught him. His mind drifted back to the mission that shattered everything. The blast, the choking smoke, the loss of Marcus Reed, his closest friend and teammate. Marcus's last words echoed in Ethan's mind through the crackle of a dying radio. If you make it out alive, Cole saves something. Don't let this world turn you cold. Ethan's jaw clenched tight. He'd saved lives on the battlefield, but failed to save his friend, his marriage, and ultimately himself. Since the war, life had slipped into an endless, colorless winter, bleak, hollow, and stripped of meaning. The wipers screeched across the windshield, battling the relentless blizzard. A weather alert flickered on the radio, warning of near-zero visibility, but Ethan switched it off. The quiet that followed felt strangely comforting. Rex shifted beside him, a low rumble escaping his throat. His ears perked forward, nose twitching as he sensed something. "What's on your mind, boy?" Ethan whispered softly. Rex's eyes locked on the snow-covered road ahead. Through the swirling flakes, a faint movement emerged. Two tiny figures staggered along the roadside. Ethan frowned, leaning forward. At first, they looked like mere shadows, but as the truck edged closer, the shapes took on clarity. An elderly couple, arm in arm, battling the biting wind. The man moved with stiff caution. Each step measured his shoulders, hunched beneath a threadbare gray coat far too thin for the cruel cold. His face, partially hidden by a worn wool cap, was weathered and wind-chapped, the skin of a man who'd spent a lifetime under open skies. He leaned heavily on a walking stick that sank deeply into the snow with every cautious step. The woman beside him was frail, her silver hair escaping the hood, whipping wildly against her face. Her posture whispered quiet resilience, a strength forged through decades of putting others before herself. Her gloved hand clutched a small canvas bag tightly to her chest, as if holding something priceless. Ethan eased the truck forward, his heart tightening in his throat. No one should have been out here. No town for miles in either direction. The man faltered, and the woman gripped his arm for support. Even through the windshield, Ethan could see their bodies tremble with exhaustion. He slammed the brakes. The tires skidded on the ice before gripping the road. The truck came to a halt just yards away. For a moment he sat frozen, engine humming softly, eyes fixed on them through the falling snow. They looked unbearably fragile, like lost souls drifting through a world long abandoned. His thoughts drifted to Marcus once more, to failed promises and broken vows. A fire stirred inside him, a burning ache that refused to be ignored. He grabbed his flashlight and swung the door open. The wind cut into his face like a blade, slicing through his coat. Rex let out a sharp, alert bark and leapt out, paws sinking into the soft drift. Together, man and dog stepped boldly into the raging storm. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, voice barely piercing the wind. "Are you folks okay?" The couple froze. The man turned slowly, blinking snow from his eyes. His voice was hoarse and worn, thick with cold. "We're all right, son. Just trying to make it to town." "Town's 15 miles that way," Ethan said, gesturing behind them. "You won't make it in this weather." The woman's lips were pale, her breath shallow. "We had no choice," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear and regret. "My husband, his heart medicine's gone. We were hoping someone might—" She faltered, pressing a hand against her chest, as if the words themselves were pain. Ethan stepped forward, lowering his flashlight to ease their strain. "There's a cabin a few miles back," he offered. "You can rest there, get warm." The man shook his head stubbornly, though Ethan could see the shake in his hands. "We don't want to trouble anyone. We'll manage." Ethan almost smiled at the familiar pride, a flicker of recognition in the stubbornness of men who won't ask for help. The same pride he'd seen in soldiers bleeding out on desert sands. He crouched slightly to meet their eyes. "Sir, it's not about trouble. You won't survive another hour out here." The old man's jaw tightened, caught between trembling fear and stubborn pride. His wife clutched his arm with urgency. Outside, the snow swirled more fiercely, blanketing their coats, dusting Ethan's lashes, and settling deep into Rex's thick fur. Rex moved forward cautiously, his tail low, ears sharply pricked, projecting calm resolve, silently assuring them this stranger was trustworthy. The woman's eyes locked with the dog's, then drifted to Ethan's. There was a wordless understanding in that silent exchange, something deeply human that words could never capture. Ethan took a measured step closer, lifting both hands with open palms, an unspoken promise of peace. "My name's Ethan Cole," he said calmly. "I live just up the ridge. Let me help you." The old man hesitated, his gaze flickering between Ethan, the dog, and the raging storm. "We don't even know you," he murmured. Ethan offered a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's okay. You don't have to. Just trust me for a few miles." The woman glanced at her husband, snowflakes melting into her hair. "Walter," she whispered softly. "Please." Ethan watched the fire fade from the old man's eyes, replaced by raw exhaustion. His shoulders sagged under the weight, yet he still fought to stand tall, shielding his wife as though his presence alone could hold back the unforgiving wind. Ethan stretched out his arm toward them, his voice dropping to a quiet, earnest plea. "Come with me," he said. "No one survives the cold alone." For a fleeting second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind paused, the snow stilled, even the air between them hung heavy and silent. Walter Reed finally met Ethan's steady gaze, his eyes a blend of fear and reluctant hope. Evelyn gripped his hand tightly. Slowly, they both nodded. Rex's brief bark shattered the silence. Ethan stepped forward into the blizzard, ready to guide them toward the faint glimmer of life waiting beyond the frozen night. The journey back to the cabin was slow and fraught with danger. The snow swallowed the headlights in a blinding frenzy, while the old truck groaned with every cautious turn. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled breaths of 3 souls and 1 vigilant dog. Walter slumped heavily in the passenger seat, gloved hands trembling against his knees. His lips had lost their color, pale as frost, and his breathing came in short, uneven gasps. Beside him, Evelyn clung to his arm, whispering soft words as if sheer sound could keep his heart alive. She was small, delicate beneath layers of worn wool and faded fabrics. But there was an unbreakable strength in the way she carried herself. Like wind-worn rock, tested and undefeated. Ethan's gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of her face under passing beams of light. The lines etched around her eyes told stories of years spent in worry and love, yet her spirit stayed serene despite the fear. Rex sat alert between them, his thick fur sprinkled with melting snowflakes, amber eyes locked on Walter. Every so often the dog leaned in to gently sniff the old man's hand, as if sensing the fragile thread between life and loss through scent alone. Ethan reached out to stroke his loyal companion's head. "It's okay, boy. We're almost home." His own voice felt strange to his ears, weighted with hope and urgency, gentler than he had imagined. The cabin emerged through the raging storm like a long-lost memory brought back to life. Modest wooden half swallowed by the swelling snowbanks. The windows were dark, except for the faint glimmer of their headlights reflecting. Ethan pulled up close to the porch and leapt out his boots, sinking deep into the snow. He hurried to open Evelyn's door, extending a steady hand, cautious on the ice. She hesitated before reaching for it, her fingers cold as stone, yet still moving with a quiet grace. Walter tried to rise, but stumbled. Ethan caught him under the arm. "Easy now, I've got you." Walter, proud even in his frailty, muttered, "I can walk." But his legs gave way with the very next step. Inside the cabin was cold and silent, the air thick with the scent of dust and pine. Ethan hadn't set foot here in months. This was the home his parents had built decades before, every plank nailed by his father's own hands. After they were gone, he could never bring himself to sell it. He once dreamed of filling it with a family of his own, but the war had slowly carved that hope away piece by piece. Now he moved swiftly, the hard-won instinct of survival leading him. "Set him down here," he said, guiding Walter into the worn armchair beside the hearth. Evelyn knelt next to her husband, gently rubbing his hands, her breath trembling. Ethan dropped to one knee before the fireplace struck a match and coaxed a flame into a nest of dry twigs. The fire caught with a sharp crackle, its glow spilling over the room like something sacred. Rex circled once, then settled beside Walter's chair, head resting on his paws, eyes still vigilant. Ethan grabbed an old blanket from the couch's back and draped it protectively over Walter's legs. Then he filled a kettle with snow and set it on the stove. "We'll get you warm," he promised. Evelyn nodded, though her gaze seemed lost, flicking nervously from one shadowed corner of the cabin to another. "You live here alone?" she asked softly, almost with an apology in her voice. "Yeah," Ethan answered without turning around. "Just me and him?" He nodded toward Rex, who twitched an ear at the mention of his name. "My folks built this place. It's been empty for years until I came back." Walter's eyes fluttered open, their pale blue depth clouded with exhaustion. "You a soldier, son?" he asked, noting the patches still sewn onto Ethan's coat. "I was," Ethan said, simply offering no more. Walter didn't press further. Men who had endured enough knew silence was its own reply. Ethan stirred a pot of canned soup on the stove, the aroma of chicken and herbs gradually pushing the cold away. Evelyn stood quietly behind him, rubbing warmth into her hands. Her wedding band caught the flickering firelight, a thin gold circle, worn smooth and dull. "We didn't mean to cause trouble," she whispered. "We thought we could make it to town. Walter's medicine ran out 3 days ago. The phone line went dead after the storm." Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "You shouldn't have been out there." She offered a soft smile, tired yet gracious. "We've faced worse storms, Mr. Cole. I thought we could handle just one more." Her voice was calm, but her eyes revealed a quiet, unspoken fear, a fear she refused to let take hold. Ethan caught sight of it and felt a gripping ache in his chest, a deep recognition of bravery born from love, not from pride. He ladled steaming soup into 3 bowls, passing one to each of them, then took his seat on the hearth's edge with his own. The heat slowly spread through the cabin, thawing frost from the panes. Walter ate cautiously, his hands trembling with every bite. Evelyn watched him more than she ate, ever ready to steady his spoon if his grip faltered. Rex lingered close by, occasionally lifting his head to gaze at the flickering flames, his ears flicking at every creak and groan of the cabin. Ethan's eyes drifted toward the mantel above the fire. There sat a small wooden box, untouched since the day of the funeral. A quiet pull urged him to rise, and he opened it gently. Inside lay his father's pocket watch, silver, with a soft patina, its glass cracked across the face. It had stopped exactly at 6:17. He traced the weathered engraving on the back. Robert, a tribute to time well spent. Robert Cole. His father, a man who lived by the conviction that kindness was a sacred duty. Ethan turned the watch over in his hand, the silence where its ticking once was pressing heavily on his mind. His father had carried it through every storm, through years of poverty, through every hardship that life on the farm and family demanded. And now it rested still, as though time itself had given up, waiting for better days. He slipped it carefully into his pocket. Maybe it was folly, but it felt like holding a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Behind him, Evelyn's voice came softly. "That belonged to your father." He nodded quietly. "Yeah. He used to say this watch kept him steady when nothing else was in his control." She offered a faint smile. "Sounds like he was a good man." "He was," Ethan murmured, barely above a whisper, "better than I ever managed to be." The fire snapped, sending sparks flying upward. Walter shifted restlessly in his chair, mumbling something half asleep. Evelyn leaned close, brushing a stray lock of silver hair from his forehead. Ethan watched her for a long moment, the patience in her gestures a kind of love that endures, because it has no other place to go. For reasons he couldn't explain, the sight squeezed his heart tight. When she finally turned toward him, her face softened in the firelight's flicker. "Thank you," she said simply. "You might have just saved his life tonight." Ethan gave a small, humble nod, unable to hold her gaze for long. "Maybe you reminded me what saving truly looks like." After that, silence fell over them. The wind howled outside the cabin walls, but inside there was warmth. The very first true warmth Ethan had felt in what seemed like forever. He leaned back against the hearth, listening to the steady crackle of the fire and the slow rise and fall of Walter's breath. The pocket watch tucked inside his coat suddenly felt heavy, with meaning ticking again in his mind, even though the hands hadn't moved in years. As the flames faded to a gentle ember glow, Evelyn reached out lightly, touching Ethan's arm. Her eyes, glassy with exhaustion, searched his face. "Robert," she whispered the name, slipping out before she could stop it. Ethan froze. The name hit him like a blast of cold air. Robert, his father's name. For a moment he struggled to breathe. Evelyn blinked, confusion briefly crossing her features. Then she smiled faintly as if she saw someone else standing where he was. Her hand rested atop his, shaking yet warm. Ethan remained silent, his eyes locked on her as the firelight danced softly across their faces, stirring something deep within him, a blend of grief, lingering memories, and a feeling he hadn't dared to embrace in years. Outside, the storm roared relentlessly, but inside the cabin the fire burned steady and calm. Dawn crept slowly over the mountain peaks, filtering through curtains dusted with snow. The tempest had quieted, leaving the world wrapped in a pristine, silent white. Gentle light poured through the frost-covered windows, casting a soft golden hue over the wooden walls. Ethan sat by the fire elbows, resting on bent knees, staring deep into the flickering orange flames that kissed the hearth's stones. The scent of burning pine mingled with the subtle sweetness of oatmeal gently cooking on the stove. Behind him, the floor creaked softly, as Rex stirred, stretching with a low groan before curling back down at the doorway, his fur gleaming like burnished bronze in the firelight. From the corner of the room came a faint, confused murmur. Ethan turned. Evelyn Reed was awake. She sat upright on the couch, wrapped in blankets, her silver hair forming a wild halo around her face. For a long moment she scanned the cabin with the wide-eyed stillness of someone trying to anchor herself in a fading dream. Then her gaze settled on Ethan, and a gentle smile softened her lips. "You stayed," she whispered. Her voice was fragile, weathered by age, yet carried a tender note of gratitude. Ethan nodded. "You were worn out last night. The storm hasn't cleared enough to make the drive safe. Figured we'd all wait it out here a little longer." She seemed to ease, pulling the blanket more tightly around her, but a flicker of confusion shadowed her face. "Has Robert made it home yet?" she asked quietly. The name struck Ethan with the faint echo of a life long past. He set down the coffee mug he held. "Robert." Before he could speak, Walter's hoarse voice came softly from the armchair by the fire. "Evelyn, dear," he said gently, "that's not Robert. That's Mr. Cole, Ethan. He's the one who found us last night." She blinked, brows knitting as she studied Ethan's face. Then color rose to her cheeks with quiet embarrassment. "Oh dear," she murmured, covering her mouth. "I'm so sorry, dear, I must have—" "It's okay," Ethan interjected quickly, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You were tired. It's an easy mistake." Walter sighed slowly, rubbing his chest, watching his wife with gentle concern. "She gets mixed up sometimes," he explained softly. The weight of those words settled deep-shaped by years of love and hardship. "The doctor says it's mild dementia. It ebbs and flows. Some days she's sharp as ever, other days she drifts back in time." Ethan nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "That's all right," he said again. "Just rest easy, you've got time." He rose and spooned oatmeal into 3 bowls, dusting each with sugar. Evelyn ate carefully, her bites small and thoughtful, occasionally glancing at Rex, who watched her with quiet, respectful curiosity. She reached down to stroke him, her fingers trembling as they moved over his rough fur. "Such a good boy," she said. "He reminds me of our Duke. Remember?" Walter gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "I remember," he said, his hand briefly brushing hers before a harsh cough rattled from deep within, catching Ethan's attention. "You need to take it easy for a while," Ethan said softly but firmly. "You're still too fragile." Walter leaned back with a weary sigh. "The roads are buried anyway. You're probably right. I guess the world can wait on us for just one more day." As their breakfast came to an end, Ethan occupied himself with tidying the cabin, stacking kindling, sealing windows, replenishing the kettle. Having voices fill the house again felt almost unreal. The last time laughter had echoed here was long ago, his parents' voices, before the war, before his mother's illness, back when everything still held color and hope. Suddenly, Rex padded across the floor, his nose twitching in alert. He headed toward the corner where a worn leather suitcase rested beside the armchair, the same one Walter had carried the night before. The dog sniffed it deeply, then wagged his tail once, letting out a soft whine. "What's got you curious, buddy?" Ethan asked. He knelt and unlatched the suitcase, Walter's stirred eyes catching the movement. "It's okay," the old man said, voice hushed but steady. "You can look." "I've been meaning to go through this for a while," Ethan replied. He lifted the lid carefully. Inside, bundles of aged letters lay tied with a faded blue ribbon. Beneath them was a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked edges softened by time, releasing the scent of old paper mingled with sea salt, a fragrance steeped in memories. He glanced up. "You served in the Navy?" Walter gave a faint smile, eyes distant. "A long time ago, before I married her. I was on a destroyer in the Pacific. Wrote to her every week, even when the letters never left the ship." Ethan picked up one of the envelopes, handwriting neat and deliberate, a man striving for control amid the chaos. He unfolded the fragile paper and began to read, December 17th, 1952. "My dearest Evelyn, if ever you find yourself lost in a storm, I will find you just as I did the day we met, no matter how far I must trek through the cold." Ethan paused, his throat tightening. He could almost hear Marcus's voice ringing in his mind again, a promise forged on the battlefield. "Hold on to something," Ethan whispered, looking at Walter, who stared into the flickering flames, eyes wet but steady. "You kept every one of them," Ethan said softly. "Couldn't bear to throw them away," Walter replied. "I never mailed half. Sometimes the letters never left because the mail was down. Other times I think I just needed to write them to keep her near." Ethan gently closed the suitcase, a strange stirring awakening within him, a mix of jealousy and deep respect. Such enduring love, unwavering across years and miles, was alien to him. His life had been a pursuit of duty, not of heartfelt connection. Outside snow slid silently from the roof like a whisper. Evelyn gazed towards the window, her faint reflection shimmering in the frost. "It feels strange," she murmured, voice unsteady. "When I look outside, it's as if the world has forgotten us. But maybe it's just waiting for us to remember." Ethan turned to her, but she seemed distant again, lost deep in the far reaches of her own thoughts. The rest of the day slipped by in quiet solitude. Walter dozed peacefully by the fire, with Rex faithfully guarding sentinel at his feet. Ethan was busy fixing a loose shutter and cleaning the stovepipe, his movement steady and reassuring in their comforting routine. As night deepened, the wind rose again, moaning through the trees like an ancient lullaby. Evelyn softly hummed a melody to herself as she folded blankets, a tune unfamiliar to Ethan but strangely calming. He paused, captivated by her glow in the firelight. He noticed the slight tremble in her hands, yet she worked with quiet resolve. Walter stirred awake, briefly, glancing toward his wife, softly saying, "She used to sing that when our boy was just a child. It helps her hold on to the good memories." Ethan nodded silently, feeling a tightness in his chest. He didn't ask what became of their son, some wounds best left untouched. Later, with the dishes washed and the fire reduced to glowing embers, Ethan sat alone at the table, rolling the silver pocket watch between his fingers. His thoughts wandered to Walter's letter. "If you ever find yourself lost in a storm, I will come for you." Those words echoed endlessly in his mind, blending with Marcus's voice, mingling with the faces of those he couldn't save. Perhaps this was what his friend truly meant. Maybe saving wasn't only about pulling someone out of the fire. Maybe it was about standing watch when no one else would. He slipped the watch back into his pocket, eyes resting on the two old souls dozing by the fire, their hands gently intertwined. For the first time in years, he no longer felt like a ghost drifting through his own life. Morning arrived, calm and brittle, the storm spent during the night. The mountains stood silent beneath a pale winter sun, their slopes blanketed in snow so pure it almost blinded the eyes. Smoke lazily spiraled from the cabin's chimney, curling into the frigid air. Inside, the warmth returned rich with the scent of coffee pine and quiet healing. Ethan stood by the window gripping his mug, watching soft light spill over the snowbanks. Rex lay close to the hearth, his tail thumping gently whenever Ethan's shadow shifted. The dog's fur, thick and lush in shades of black and tan, had dried. His breath rose faintly in a mist as he sighed in contentment. Cautious footsteps approached, followed by a low grunt. "You planning to stand there all day, son?" Walter Reed's voice rasped, rough as sandpaper on wood, weathered but unyielding. He wore one of Ethan's spare flannel shirts, sleeves rolled up despite the chill, revealing wiry forearms hardened by years of hand labor, not machines. His frame was lean but sturdy, forged from grit and determination, the kind of man who refused to rust no matter how hard time tried. Gray hair poked out in tufts beneath a wool cap, a faint scar tracing the side of his jaw. "A souvenir," he said, "from a Korean winter that never seemed to end." Ethan gave a half smile. "Aren't you supposed to be resting?" Walter waved off the concern. "Rest is for folks without leaky roofs." He nodded upward to the dark water stain spreading across the wooden ceiling planks. "Figured I'd earned my keep before Evelyn caught on that I was softening up." Evelyn sat by the fire, draped with a blanket over her knees, chuckling softly. Her silver hair shimmered in the warm light, and her face showed the gentle glow of renewed vitality. "You're not taking a step until you finish your breakfast," she said with a tender, yet resolute tone, a firmness only forged through a lifetime of partnership. But Walter was already making his way toward the door. Ethan let out a deep breath, set his mug aside, and trailed after him. Outside, the air cut sharp like glass. The sun was pale, yet unwavering, casting a shimmer on frost-clad branches. Together, they climbed onto the porch roof, carefully avoiding the slick patches of ice. Ethan passed up nails and shingles while Walter worked with a confidence that caught him off guard. "You've done this before," Ethan remarked. Walter's grin widened, the creases at his eyes deepening with experience. "Son, I've been patching things up longer than you've been drawing breath. Navy didn't teach me much about peace, but it damn sure schooled me on how to mend the broken." They toiled side by side in comfortable silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of hammer strikes. When Ethan paused to reposition a plank, Walter caught his eye. "You said Seal Right, that's the ocean, isn't it?" Ethan's voice dropped low. "Special operations, sleepless nights, and broiling places I'd rather forget." Walter nodded slowly, understanding. "Korea was my hell snowed in instead of baked, but the hauntings, they're the same." Ethan met his gaze. "You ever stop hearing them?" Walter drove a nail with a single, sure strike and set down his hammer. "No, you don't stop. You learn to talk back." He stared toward the horizon, where the forest pressed close against the land. "After the war, I repaired whatever I could lay my hands on. Cars, radios, fences, it kept my hands working while my mind mended. Stop fixing and you start breaking from within." Ethan nodded, letting those words sink in like a blistering but healing salve. For a long time he thought stillness meant safety, but Walter's steady defiance made him think twice. Maybe it wasn't running away, but moving forward that kept a man alive. By midday they had the roof sealed and the chimney patched. The old clock still hung crooked on the cabin wall, silent, and stopped at 12:30. Walter examined it with the patience of a craftsman. "You know, he said a clock's a lot like a man. Ignore the small jams too long, and before you know it, time just stops." He gently removed the glass, face-adjusted the springs inside with his pocket tool, and gave it a single winding turn. The soft click of gears springing back to life was barely audible, but stirred something deep in Ethan's heart. Rex barked once from outside, breaking the quiet. Ethan glanced out the window to see the dog trotting toward the tree line, nose close to the ground. "Hold up," he muttered as he pulled on his coat. Walter watched from the doorway while Ethan followed Rex into the forest. The trail weaved through snow-laden pines, sunlight streaming down in shards. The dog moved with clear purpose, tail held high. Paws pressed softly into the snow, leaving behind a trail of clear imprints. They journeyed close to half a mile before the dense woods opened up into a quiet clearing. There, half crumbled from years of neglect, a wooden shed stood. Its roof sagged heavily. The door hung ajar, and the walls were cloaked in thick moss and wild thyme. Ethan's breath hitched. The place stirred memories from childhood tales, his father's rescue cabin, a sanctuary where his dad once sheltered lost hikers and stranded hunters seeking refuge. Inside, faint echoes of the past lingered: an old wool blanket, a rusty lantern, and a first aid kit labeled Coal Rescue Service, dated 1979. Ethan brushed snow off the workbench and uncovered a small wooden carving beneath it. A bird mid-flight, rough-hewn yet alive with motion. His father had loved carving birds. "You old soul," he whispered. "You were saving lives long before I ever learned to fight." Rex nudged the corner of the bench and barked again. Ethan lowered himself beside the dog and spotted a small wooden plaque nailed to the wall. The carving had faded with time, but the words remained clear. "If you find this place, you're not lost. You're simply found at just the right moment." He stood there, the world hushed, except for his steady breathing. It felt as if his father's voice was etched in the wood itself, reminding him compassion was a legacy, not just a lesson learned. When he stepped back outside, his coat dusted with fresh snow, his face carried a new resolve. Walter looked up from oiling the clock's gears. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Ethan nodded slowly. "The cabin my father built. He used it to help those stranded out here. Guess I'm carrying on his mission." Walter's faint smile held pride, his eyes shimmering with quiet respect. "That's the finest legacy, son, the kind you can't spend but keep giving away." Ethan said nothing. He simply stood as the clock behind them gave a soft, trembling tick, then another and another. The sound pulsed gently through the cabin, hesitant at first, then steady. Walter looked toward it, pleased. "Well," he murmured, "looks like time has finally chosen to move again." Ethan met his gaze, a warm smile breaking through. "Yeah," he said softly. "Maybe it's about time." Outside, snow began falling again, quiet and patient, the gentle dance of white drifting past the window panes. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine sap and wood smoke. Ethan knelt by the fireplace, feeding small logs to the flames. The firelight cast soft golden shadows across his face, revealing the contours of a man who had endured many long, lonely winters. His hands, rough and scarred, moved rhythmically like a prayer, a reminder that fire was both warmth and hope. His hands, weathered and marked by countless battles, moved with the steady grace of a man who understood that fire was both sanctuary and silent devotion. The steady ticking of the freshly mended clock filled the room, a sound that spoke of time once fractured finding its way forward. Walter sat at the table, carefully polishing a brass compass with deliberate care. His large, weather-beaten hands moved with reverence. Occasionally, his gaze shifted toward Evelyn, who rocked gently in a chair by the window, her petite frame wrapped in a knitted shawl colored like fallen autumn leaves. She stood there fragile and small, cloaked in a knitted shawl that mirrored the deep golden hues of fall's last breath. Her face shone softly in the firelight, the silver strands of her hair catching every flicker like threads of pure light. She hummed quietly, her voice a gentle whisper, thin yet sweet, so tender it seemed to quiet even the raging storm beyond the windows. Rex lay stretched out near the hearth, his chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed, yet calm and watchful. His ears twitched now and then, alert to the crackle of burning logs or the distant moan of wind weaving through the pine trees. Now 6 years old, his black and tan coat bore streaks of silver around his muzzle, a testament to loyalty maturing into noble grace. To Ethan, Rex wasn't just a dog. He was his steadfast anchor, the one soul who had faced his darkest storms and still saw him as whole and unbroken. Ethan reached for another log, yet his fingers brushed something buried deep within the ashes. He furrowed his brow and used the poker to pry it free. A fragile curl of paper emerged, stained by soot and time. Drawing it closer, he realized it wasn't a single page, but a handful of half-burned letters, their edges singed and crumbling like autumn leaves. "What in the world?" he whispered under his breath. Gently, he laid them on the hearthstone and brushed away the dust. A faint aroma of old ink and smoke lingered in the air. Walter glanced up from the table. "Did you find something?" "Letters," Ethan replied softly. "Looks like someone tried to burn them long ago." Evelyn's eyes brightened with curiosity. "From who?" Ethan carefully unfolded one of the less damaged sheets. The handwriting was elegant, looping undeniably a woman's script. The ink had faded to a ghostly brown, but the words were still clear. "My dearest Robert, sometimes I watch the fading light through the trees and wonder if you see it too. Wherever you are, the house feels empty without you, as if the silence itself is aching. The neighbors say you're out saving lives, but I wish just once you'd save a moment for us." Ethan's voice caught. "Robert," he breathed, his throat tightening. Walter slowly stood compass still, clutched in hand. "Your mother's letters," he said quietly. Ethan nodded, eyes fixed on the fragile pages. He never knew much about his mother beyond what she left behind. Her recipes, her gardening tools, and her voice fading like a distant memory he could barely grasp. Yet here in the ashes of the fire his father once built, her heart had waited, yearning to be discovered. He picked up another letter carefully. The bottom was burned away, consumed by flames, but the surviving lines spoke volumes. "You always said the world needs good men. I just wish the world wasn't the only one to have you." Evelyn covered her lips with a trembling hand. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered softly, sorrow thick in her voice. Her love for him must have been boundless. She did, Ethan answered, eyes locked on the fading ink. He was always gone helping strangers running those mountain rescues. I thought he just loved the work, but maybe he was fleeing from something. Or maybe he simply didn't know how to stop giving. Walter settled beside him, leaning heavily on his cane. That's the burden we carry, men like him and us, he said, voice rough, yet tender. We're convinced love means putting everyone else before ourselves, saving the world, before saving those we hold dear. Sometimes we forget that those waiting at home need saving just as much. Evelyn's eyes wandered toward the flickering flames. When Walter left, she whispered gently, I wrote to him every single day. Half the time my letters never made it past the post office. But I kept writing anyway. It was my way of holding on to the hope that he'd come back to read them. A faint smile touched her lips. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Sometimes love isn't about who's still around. It's about who never forgets. Ethan looked over at her. This fragile woman who had endured decades of war and heartbreak, yet still carried a warmth like a glowing lantern. Her words filled the silence between them like a sacred vow. He stretched out his hand, offering her one of the letters. Would you read it? His voice was soft. Her fingers trembled as they grasped the fragile paper. The handwriting was delicate, the kind that reveals itself only when emotion runs deeper than words can capture. Evelyn read slowly, her voice wavering with raw feeling. At night I listen to the coyotes, and I imagine they are the sea calling you back to me. If you ever lose your way in the storm, follow the light in our window. It's the only flame I keep burning. A single tear traced down Evelyn's cheek. She whispered, I'm lonely. But beneath that sorrow was an unwavering hope that he'd come home. That's what makes it so beautiful. Walter nodded solemnly. That kind of faith, that's what holds this world together. He met Ethan's gaze, steady and sure. Maybe your father didn't fail, son. Maybe all this, the rescues, the cabin, was his way of giving back what your mom once gave him. Maybe he just didn't know how to show it. Ethan's jaw clenched, memories churning like stones tumbling in a restless stream. He recalled his father's frequent absences, his mother's fading smile over the years, and the silence that swallowed their home after she died. For the very first time, he understood they'd both been trying in their own broken, imperfect ways to love. He fed one more log to the fire, watching the flames devour the charred edges of the old, treasured letters. The ink bled upward, curling into wisps of smoke. Evelyn reached out her hand, settling gently over his wrist. Sometimes, she whispered, letting the fire finish what it began is the kindest farewell you can offer. Ethan nodded slowly, eyes entranced by the flickering light. Maybe, he murmured, but I believe she wanted these letters to be found. Maybe she knew I'd need them someday. Walter's low chuckle was warm and certain. Looks like she was right. Outside, snow began to fall thicker again, swirling like silent whispers against the window pane. The fire's crackle filled the room with a gentle glow. Rex shifted, resting his head on Ethan's boot, his eyes reflecting the warmth like glowing embers. Evelyn leaned back, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. It's strange, she said after a long, thoughtful pause. This place, it feels like it's been patiently waiting for us. Ethan gave a faint smile. Maybe it has. He glanced at Walter and Evelyn, two strangers who had quietly become part of his journey. Then he looked down at Rex, peacefully asleep beside the fire. The letters lay in the hearth, their ashes mingling with the old soot left behind by winters long past. The flames rose and fell. Whispering voices carried through endless time. For the first time in years, Ethan no longer felt like an outsider peering in. The cabin was no longer empty. It was home. It breathed with a quiet life, filled with the warmth of something almost like family. Outside, the snow kept drifting down. Inside, they sat together, three intertwined souls and a faithful dog, united by silence. Memories and the gentle rhythm of time finally mending what was broken. By the third morning, the storm had faded into stillness, leaving a hushed world blanketed in white. The cabin stood alone, glowing like a single ember amidst the endless snowfields, its roof sparkling beneath the shy morning sun. Ethan stood on the porch, the cold stinging his cheeks, while Rex wandered through the drifts, his nose buried deep in the powder tail, swaying in slow, graceful arcs. The air was crisp, achingly pure, as if a wound was just beginning to heal. From within came Evelyn's soft humming, her voice blending with the gentle tick of the clock and the occasional cough from Walter. For a fleeting moment, everything felt delicate, yet secure. Then the distant crunch of tires cutting through ice rose. Ethan's gaze snapped toward the sound. It grew louder, the grumble of an engine battling the snow and the harsh crackle of tires sliding. He signaled Rex to heel and stepped down the porch stairs, his boots creaking on the frozen wood. Through the trees, a figure appeared, wrapped in a heavy brown coat, dusted with frost, a sheriff's vehicle rumbling behind him. The man looked to be in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, his face rugged and etched from many winters and harder truths. His pale blue eyes were sharp beneath the brim of a weathered hat. A gray mustache framed a mouth set in quiet resolve, a man who put duty above comfort. A gold badge shimmered faintly on his chest. Sheriff Cole Maddox. The same name was painted in faded letters on the side of the truck. "Morning," he said, voice steady yet cautious. "You the one living up here?" Ethan nodded, his voice calm. "That's right, Ethan Cole." The sheriff squinted, scanning the cabin, then the older figures moving inside behind frosted windows. "You got 2 elderly folks with you." "That's right," Ethan replied. "Found them stranded on the highway 3 nights back. Brought them here till the storm broke." Maddox frowned, peeling off his gloves. "We've been searching for them. Their family down in Millbrook reported them missing. Said they left town before the blizzard. We were starting to fear the worst." Ethan exhaled a mix of relief and unease. "They're safe now, Walter," and Evelyn Reed. "He's been weak from the cold, but they're getting better." The sheriff stepped up the porch stairs, boots crunching the ice. Rex watched him carefully, but stayed quiet, standing beside Ethan with ears alert. Maddox's eyes met this dog with quiet admiration. "Fine animal you've got there. Navy K9, right?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You served in the army." Maddox pulled back his coat to reveal a silver pin on his collar, a relic from another chapter of life. "I've seen that look before, men and dogs who come back carrying more shadows than medals." For the first time, Ethan's shoulders relaxed. "You're not wrong about that." The sheriff stepped inside at Ethan's invitation, stamping snow off his boots. Someone showed up. Walter attempted to sit up, but Maddox lifted a hand gently. "No need, sir. Just relieved to see you breathing." "You scared your family good?" Walter chuckled, his voice still ragged. "Looks like we gave ourselves a scare too." As the sheriff warmed his hands by the fire, his stare softened. "You did right bringing them here," he told Ethan. "But the mountain roads are gone. A landslide wiped out half the ridge last night. No way to drive down for days?" Ethan frowned. "Then how'd you get up here?" Maddox grinned lightly. "Half by truck, the rest on foot. Think a little snow's gonna stop a Carolina boy?" Ethan smirked, resisting a grin. Maddox accepted the coffee Evelyn offered, nodding in thanks. "Your family's safe in Millbrook. I'll send word down the mountain as soon as the radio clears up. Until then, the best thing you can do is keep everyone warm and well-fed." Walter leaned closer, eyes sharp. "You sure the road's that bad?" "Worse," Maddox replied. "Maddox. Trees are down, ice thick enough to snap a leg. But give it a few days. A crew will come through." Ethan glanced toward the window. Snow was falling again, fine, but relentless. He felt the weight of isolation settle over him. But this time it felt less like a curse, more like a calling. Later that afternoon, after the sheriff stepped outside to check his truck's radio, Ethan and Rex set out to scout the ridge. The sky hung low and bruised dark clouds gathering again. They followed a slope behind the cabin winding into the forest. The quiet was broken only by the crunch of snow underfoot, and the soft whisper of wind weaving through the pines. Rex moved ahead, nose to the ground, tail stiff with focus. The dog stopped abruptly, barked shortly, then glanced back. Ethan followed his gaze, There, half buried in snow, a narrow trail curved along the mountain's side. It was old, nearly swallowed by time, but unmistakable. He brushed snow off a wooden post, its faded letters carved faintly, Coal Rescue Route 1980. Ethan's chest tightened. His father again. This was the very path Robert Cole had taken decades ago to reach trapped hikers, a forgotten trail connecting the upper ridge to the valley below. Crouching low, he traced the carved letters with his gloved hand. "Still saving folks, old man," he whispered. Rex wagged his tail softly as if agreeing. They followed the path a few steps until the trees thinned, unveiling the valley beneath a silver expanse of snow, with faint smoke curling from distant chimneys. The wind brought faint sounds, distant engines, voices, signs of life civilization just beyond their reach. Ethan stood frozen a long moment, cold, biting his skin, feeling something quiet, yet certain rise within him. Maybe this was why he'd stayed behind when others moved on in their lives. Perhaps helping strangers find safe paths was the legacy his father had entrusted to him to carry on. When he came back, Maddox was leaning against his truck, the radio crackling softly atop the hood. "Find anything useful?" the sheriff asked. Ethan nodded. "A trail my father made years ago leads straight down to the valley. It's a tight squeeze, but if we clear it out, folks could travel through here again. Not just us, but anyone trapped up here when winter hits." Maddox arched an eyebrow, then smiled warmly. "Sounds like your old man was a hell of a guy. You think you're his kind of man?" Ethan stared out at the mountains, silent for a moment, searching for his words. The sheriff studied him carefully, then reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a silver cross necklace, its shine dulled from years of wear. "My wife always said God places us where we need to be, not where we want to be. Keep doing what you're doing, son. The world could sure use a few more men like you." Ethan accepted the blessing with a quiet, reverent nod. Maddox tightened his gloves again as he stepped up to his truck's cab. "When this storm finally passes, I'll send word. We'll get a crew to clear that trail open again. You just hang tight until then." Ethan watched as Maddox climbed into the truck, the engine coughing to life. The sheriff gave a quick wave before the truck vanished into the snowy road, leaving nothing behind but tire tracks etched in the fresh snow. Back inside, Walter had fallen asleep beside the fire. Evelyn knitted quietly nearby, her smile gentle when Ethan stepped through the door. The fire crackled warmly, while Rex curled up close, resting his head gently against Ethan's boot. Ethan gazed into the flickering flames, whispering softly, more to himself than anyone else. "If you want me to do right, Lord, then lend me the strength." Outside, the snow drifted down like a blessing steadfast pure, wrapped in a quiet promise. When the storm finally broke, it left a silence so pristine it felt almost sacred. The mountains sparkled beneath a pale blue sky, each branch and rooftop cloaked in shimmering frost. The air was crisp, yet it carried a gentle warmth in its stillness, the kind of peace that only follows a fierce storm. Ethan stood outside the cabin beside his weathered pickup, brushing the last of the snow from the windshield. The old truck looked battered, half swallowed by drifts. But like its owner, it had endured worse. Rex circled the truck, his tail wagging softly, breath steaming in steady clouds. His black and tan fur, streaked with gray around his muzzle, caught the morning light like a glowing ember against the snow. Behind Ethan, the cabin door creaked open. Evelyn stepped out first, bundled in an oversized wool coat that swallowed her small frame. Her silver hair shimmered beneath a woolen cap, cheeks flushed softly from the cold. She smiled warmly at Ethan. "You've already done so much for us, dear." She spoke quietly. "You shouldn't have to drive us yourself." Ethan shook his head, tightening the chains on the truck's tires. "The sheriff's still clearing the road below. It's safer if I take you myself. I can handle it." Walter appeared next, moving slowly, one hand braced against the doorway. He looked pale but firm, wrapped tightly in Ethan's old army jacket. His breath came shallow, but his eyes, steady and steel blue, shone with quiet pride. "I told her you'd say that," he muttered with a half grin. "Sign never lets anyone else take the wheel, do they?" Ethan chuckled softly under his breath. "Only when they're protecting something they truly care about." Evelyn gently laid her hand on her husband's arm, her eyes shimmering with love and concern. "You'll ride up front where he can watch over you," she said softly. Walter grumbled under his breath but nodded in surrender. The three climbed into the rugged truck. Evelyn nestled beside a cozy pile of blankets in the back seat, with Rex resting faithfully at her feet, while Walter took the passenger spot, hands folded patiently in his lap. Ethan turned the ignition an initial cough that soon roared into life. As they rolled away from the cabin, the tires crushed the icy surface, carving twin tracks into the virgin snow. Silence enveloped them for the first few miles, broken only by the drone of the engine and the soft hum of rubber against frost-bitten road. Towering mountains swelled and dipped around their path like sweeping waves. Ethan's focus was razor-sharp, the same steely resolve he'd held on countless missions before, hands firm on the wheel, eyes scanning every shadow and skid. Trained to navigate chaos, he saw this frozen wilderness as just another battleground. After some time, Evelyn leaned forward ever so slightly, voice a whisper against the truck's drone. "It's stunning," she breathed. "The way the snow glistens when the sun grants its forgiveness." Ethan offered a faint smile, glancing through the rearview mirror at her. "Yeah," he whispered back. "It's like the world's quiet apology." Walter let out a low chuckle. "Or maybe it's just waiting to hit us with the same fury come next winter." Their laughter was soft, fleeting. For a brief moment it felt like any ordinary morning, three souls bound not by blood, but by a shared will to survive. Then, as the truck crept around a narrow curve where snow had turned to slush, Walter's hand twitched suddenly. His fingers gripped at his chest, breath catching sharply. "Walter?" Evelyn's voice cracked raw with panic. Ethan slammed on the brakes hard. The truck skidded a few feet before coming to a halt. He spun toward Walter, who sagged forward, lips ashen and eyes vacant. "His heart," Evelyn gasped. "It's his heart," Ethan echoed, instincts snapping into action. He yanked the truck into park, pulled off his gloves, and reclined Walter's seat. "Evelyn, stay calm," he commanded, his voice clipped but steady. "He's not gone, not yet." Pressing two fingers against Walter's neck, he found a faint pulse barely there, slipping away fast. With a swift unzip of the jacket, he braced his hands against the old man's chest. "Come on, old sailor," he muttered, voice strained but determined. "Don't let me lose you after all we've been through." He began chest compressions, strong, deliberate, rhythmical. The movements returned to him like echoes from his past training. Push, breathe, check. Push again. His muscles burned with the effort, but he never faltered. Evelyn clutched Walter's hand tight, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered desperately. "Please, Lord." Time stretched infinitely, until finally Walter gasped a fragile, broken sound, yet life returning. His chest rose once more. Ethan stepped back just a little, his breath ragged, cold sweat beading on his brow. "There you go," he murmured, voice trembling. "Stay with us." Evelyn sobbed softly, pressing her palm tenderly against Walter's cheek. Slowly, his eyes flickered open, blurry at first, then locking on Ethan's face. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Guess you really are a seal," he rasped. "Didn't even let death catch me off guard." Ethan exhaled shakily, laughter and tears mingling in relief. "You're too stubborn to give up in my truck, sir." They stayed still for a while.